Is alcohol bad for gut health? And can you drink alcohol while you're taking the Elixir course? So the main problem with alcohol is that it increases intestinal permeability. You may have heard of this referred to as leakiness, so an increase in the leakiness of the intestine. And what it refers to is the increase in paracellular permeability, meaning how much can leak through in between cells that line the intestine. This is the primary problem with alcohol in an acute sense, so in how it affects you on that same day that you consume it. I'm going to explain a little bit more about how this works. So here in this diagram, we have the picture of the digestive tract. The zoom in is on the small intestine, but this applies also to the large intestine. And what you can see here on the diagram is we have the lining of the intestine. So this is the mucosal membrane, the lining of the intestine, and it's across that lining which we absorb nutrients from our food. So of course the primary purpose of the intestine is to break down our food and absorb nutrients, and they are absorbed across this barrier. On this side we have the inside of the intestine. So if you imagine the intestine like a tube, this part is the inside of that tube, and the bloodstream over here should be red, is on the other side of the lining. And the reason why the intestine has a blood supply at all is because it needs to remove the nutrients that are absorbed from the lumen, from the inside of the intestine, absorbed across the intestinal lining. It needs to absorb those and circulate them around the body. So just a quick example, if you eat some carbohydrate, if you eat some starch, is broken down, ultimately it's broken down into glucose, and the glucose is removed from the intestine in the blood supply. So if we zoom in a bit more here, we can see that in a normal state, the junctions between these cells are closed, tight. Now these are actually called the tight junctions. And what we can see on the inside here is labeled endotoxin, but really it could be anything. It could be anything that's on the inside of the intestine. And as you can see, none of it's getting through. So only things that should be getting through are getting through. When you drink alcohol, the alcohol actually rapidly circulates through the blood and actually enters the lining of the intestine throughout the entire length of the intestine. So it's not only the intestine which it comes into contact with the alcohol when you swallow it, but it's also the rest of the intestine, because the alcohol quickly circulates around the bloodstream and enters the lining of the intestine all the way along the small intestine and the colon. When it does this, and here's the key point, the alcohol increases the permeability of the intestine. So you can see here that we have these, it's represented as gaps or breaks in these tight junctions between the cells. And as a result, things that aren't supposed to get through have gotten through. If you have a pre-existing gut dysbiosis, you're going to experience the effects of alcohol a lot more. So it's not so much that alcohol is bad for your gut as much as it is that alcohol is bad for you if you already have a gut dysbiosis. And that is because if you already have a gut dysbiosis, you will already have so what does a gut dysbiosis mean? It means that you have a lot of bad bacteria in the intestine, bad microbes, and they are producing toxins, toxic metabolites, endotoxins, and when you increase the permeability of the intestinal lining, those problematic substances can enter the bloodstream. That's why some people who have maybe IBS-D, so IBS diarrhea, or they have anxiety, or they have depression, or other problems caused by gut dysbiosis, they might experience a spike in those problems immediately after consuming alcohol. And that's because you consume the alcohol, this increases the permeability of the lining of the intestine, and everything that was already in the intestine leaking through at a small level will now leak through at a much higher level for the duration that the alcohol is present in the lining, weakening these tight junctions between the cells. The other problem is that alcohol, and this is common knowledge, but alcohol directly burdens the liver. So alcohol is viewed as a toxic chemical, which needs to be processed to acetaldehyde and then acetic acid. And this is a burden on the liver, obviously. But the problem arises where you already have a burden on the liver due to microbial byproducts. So in other words, if you have a gut dysbiosis and you have lots of bacteria in the gut producing chemicals basically that need to be processed by the liver, then you are occupying pathways in the liver, and those pathways being burdened can make it harder for the liver to process other problematic substances such as alcohol. So just to summarize, alcohol causes a problem when you already have a gut dysbiosis, because having a gut dysbiosis, meaning you've got a lot of problematic bacteria in your gut, means that more microbial toxins are there to translocate, to move across this more leaky, more permeable intestinal lining in the first place. You already have some degree of underlying leakiness in the gut, because gut dysbiosis itself will cause inflammation in the intestinal lining, which causes some degree of leakiness as a baseline. And then the third reason is that the liver is already being burdened processing microbial byproducts. So let's just give a quick example of a liver burden that arises from microbial production in the intestine. So microbes can produce something called P. cresol. P. cresol then crosses the intestinal lining, enters the liver, and must be processed by the liver. It can also be processed, dealt with in the mucosal membrane, in the lining of the intestine, but it's dealt with in the liver. And the same pathways that deal with P. cresol also deal with paracetamol. So if you have a high microbial production of P. cresol in your gut, your liver will already be burdened along the exact same pathway that it uses to process paracetamol. So, hypothetically, this would decrease the amount of paracetamol you can tolerate before it starts damaging your liver, or actually causes other problems, systemic problems. So a lot of people will wonder, can alcohol negatively affect gut health? The answer is yes. But more importantly, if you already have a gut problem, alcohol will have a much worse effect on you, a much more damaging effect on your health, because you already have a gut dysbiosis. So I just want to give an example of an experiment which demonstrated that alcohol is not the proximal problem, even in the case of liver damage. So in other words, yes, alcohol is directly hepatotoxic, it's directly damaging to liver cells, but you'll have probably wondered why some people are fine when they drink alcohol and some people experience a lot of problems, whether that's mental problems or physical problems. And the reason is because alcohol opens the floodgates, and what's in the intestine determines, therefore, what opening the floodgates, what effect that has on the body. If you have a really, really healthy gut, then opening those floodgates is not much of a problem, actually. If you have a terrible gut dysbiosis, then opening those floodgates just a little bit, just maybe one drink, can lead to you experiencing a lot of side effects, extreme depression the next day, or immediately running to the bathroom because it induces diarrhea. So I want to give an example of an experiment that demonstrated the alcohol not being the proximal problem and it being the gut dysbiosis causing the problem. So there were some researchers who took mice. This is just based on my memory of the experiment. There were mice, they were given alcohol, and over a period of several days or weeks, and then their livers were examined and liver damage was detected as expected. The researchers then sterilized the intestines of the mice. So they gave them large amounts of antibiotics and just killed all the bacteria in the guts of the mice. And then they gave them the same alcohol regime, and after that they detected that there was hardly any liver damage whatsoever. So now their hypothesis is that it's the gut bacteria causing the liver damage, and alcohol just facilitates that. And the hypothesis was that it was endotoxin, so fragments from these bad bacteria, to put it simply, bad bacteria, fragments of the cell membranes. In this case, it was LPS, lipopolysaccharide, that was being allowed to move into the bloodstream by the increase in permeability of the intestine caused by consuming alcohol. Now, when blood circulates from the intestine, firstly, it passes through the liver before it circulates systemically. And the reason for that is because everything that's going into the bloodstream from the intestine is technically a foreign material, so it must go through the liver first to be dealt with, to be detoxified, to be screened, and so on. So they had the hypothesis that it was the endotoxin from problematic bacteria in the gut of these mice. And they had half proven this by killing off all the bacteria, giving them the same amount of alcohol, and then demonstrating that there was hardly any liver damage. But the final test they did, just to prove it was this endotoxin, is that they directly infused the mice, so into the bloodstream directly, with endotoxin and without alcohol. And the mice exhibited the same liver damage that they had shown in the first experiment where they were given alcohol. So let's just briefly summarize this. So in summary, alcohol increases the permeability of the intestine. This is a problem in any case because it allows the influx of material from the inside of the intestine into the bloodstream, which wouldn't ordinarily enter the bloodstream. But it's much more of a problem when you have a gut dysbiosis, because a gut dysbiosis means you have a large amount of problematic bacteria in your intestine. One of the things they do is they produce these toxic chemicals, toxic metabolic byproducts, such as acetaldehyde, indoles, ammonia, organosulfur byproducts, and so on. The increase in permeability allows more of these things to enter the bloodstream. This affects the liver firstly, it affects the liver firstly, because the liver is where the blood first passes when it circulates away from the intestine, but then it also can affect the rest of the body. The second thing is that if you have a gut dysbiosis, your liver is already burdened in some way, whether it's being burdened by endotoxin translocating from the gut into the bloodstream into the liver, or simple chemicals that are being produced by the bacteria that are translocating, toxic chemicals that are translocating from the intestine into the bloodstream and into the liver. With that burden already in place, consuming alcohol simply adds to that burden. It simply adds to the inflammation, the inflammatory damage that the liver is experiencing. The pertinent question that remains is, can I drink alcohol during the Elixir course? The Elixir course is short duration. The Elixir probiotic course is a short duration, and abstaining from alcohol for that short duration will massively benefit you. So I would highly recommend it. It's only a short duration. I'm sure you can abstain from alcohol for that duration. You want to get the best effect out of the course, so abstain from alcohol. However, with the rare exception of the individual who says that's a deal breaker, I absolutely will not take it because I can't stop my nightly drink of wine or something like that, I would say you can take Elixir even while you are continuing to drink alcohol. It doesn't eliminate the benefits. It's just advantageous to avoid alcohol. In terms of general gut health, can you drink alcohol? I would say, well, yes, you can. I think people are going to do it regardless of what I say anyway, but how damaging is it? It's much more damaging while you have gut dysbiosis. So the first thing to achieve will be to achieve a healthy gut. Do that first, and this will reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the negative effect that alcohol can have on your liver and on your systemic health.